across the plains to the east of the city-state of the World Emperor, and to the city-state of the invincible Overlord, to the Dirthwood, and to the River Modron beyond it. And then beyond that, towards the coast of the wine-dark sea. And then southwards, from the city of Warwick, and across the sea of the mouth of the Roglaroon, and down past the coastline. There sits a village that is on the lips of many adventurers, a village that has housed the start of many a party and has seen many a party's end, that has placed host to many adventurers who have set out on expeditions towards the strange halls that lie across from the village, across the wilderlands surrounding that poor beset place, across the plains, the hills, the forests, the marshes, and brooding over the landscape like an edifice is that most feared of places, the one and only Tegel Manor. So, welcome to my channel. My name's Ian, and I'm going to go through a bit of a semi-impromptu review on Judges Guild's Tegel Manor from back in the day, and a little bit more up to date. So, bit of an introduction to it first, I think. So Tegel Manor was an adventure first published by Judges Guild in 1977 that described a rather large mansion of haunted proportions. Now, this is a oldie map of the mansion, and there's a bit of a Frankenstein job, but as we will see going forwards, there is a new edition of this floating around for both 5th edition and for Swords and Wizardry, produced by Frog God Games, that came out as part of a Kickstarter. So the Tegel Manor itself was first released as Supplement L. Judges Guild back in the day, they produced these supplements by letter that introduced elements of the Wildlands and the City-State campaign. And Tegel Manor was originally Supplement L to that. From there, it got published as a 32-page module in its own right, with a wilderness map and the poster map of the dungeon itself, or the manor itself. Then after that, it was re-released in a revised format that added some more content to it, up the page count more or less. Going on from there, it was picked up in the late 80s by a company called Game Science, who published another version of it, revised. Now, this was back in the day when Dungeons and Dragons was transitioning between Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st edition and 2nd edition. So there was a bit more, or floating around at the time, there was a bit of nostalgia for the old-timey games. It's one of these things that usually happens when editions of a game that come through, old things get re-released for it, and you know, you have that spike in popularity. So Game Science releasing this another version of Tegel Manor back in 1989 wasn't really so much of a surprise. And then in 2018, Frog God Games, who had the rights to it at that point, I believe they still do, still for sale on their website, created a Kickstarter in order to get a 5th edition version of that, of Tegel Manor going again. Similar authorship to the D20 version, and also this particular installment or version or release, whatever, of Tegel Manor. I know I've mentioned the fact that there's a 5th edition version and then there's a Swords and Wizardry version. What there also is a Pathfinder kind of stat block, whatever, supplement to it as well. Anyway, I've sat here with this Frankenstein version of the map for a bit. So what I want to do is to crack into the 5th edition version of the book. Most of the stuff is the same in both the Swords and Wizardry and the 5th edition book, other than the fact that the stat blocks are obviously different for the 2 games, and the sensibilities are slightly different. The balancing and the room description, the mechanics of the room descriptions and so on are a bit different. So let's switch over to that. Reason why I wanted to show you this first is when you get to see the maps for the new editions, you will understand what I'm talking about when I start commentating on them in something that I want to say about them. But there you go. Right, and we'll refer back to that in a second. Okay, so this is the 5th edition Kickstarter edition of Tegel Manor. Nice hardback, quite thick. What we're talking about, half inch thick. There is over 300 pages. Oh, 210, 211. So 211 pages of content, plus the usual disclaimer that comes at the back of third-party books for Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, going back to the cover. Let's move this into the keyboard a little bit so you can see the whole thing. All right, so the way that you can differentiate both of the editions, the Swords and Wizardry and the 5th edition version of this book, are exactly the same, other than the logo down here. So for Swords and Wizardry it says SW, and for 5th edition D&D it says 5e. Okay, so don't get disappointed by picking up the wrong book. Just make sure that the logo on the bottom is the right for the game that you want to buy the thing for, and you're good to go. Right, so what I'll do is fly through the contents of this in comparison to what the original contained. The original was largely very brief description of the village itself, some guidelines for the game master to flesh out the village if he so wished to. Very useful to do that. A wilderness map, and then a room by room description of the manor itself. Not much in the way of plot line. Brief sort of examination of the Rump family, who are important, and we'll come to them in a second. But that's pretty much it. Typical fare for your 32-ish page module adventures from back in the day. Descriptions of a location, some guidelines for using that location, and then away you go. What we get with the 5th edition, we get a lot more, as you can imagine by some of the things like, for example, the classic adventures reincarnated versions of things from Goodman Games, and some of the reiterations of classic old adventures that Wizards of the Coast have put together. They obviously, the 5th edition mentality is to provide more of a story framework alongside the descriptions of the locations. So there is a bit of a classic dungeon crawl type feel to this, but there's also that additional material, storytelling material, as we'll go through. Right, so first off, you get 2 poster maps. One is of the wilderness. Now this is effectively it's drawn from the original wilderness map that you got with the original game. Got a tripod. I've got to try and sort something out and do not have tripods in the way so much. But anyway, so this is it's a bit shiny for my taste. I much prefer a more satin finished map, shall we say. In fact, it's very shiny, and these are the current wilderness maps, wilderness, or the most up-to-date wilderness maps for the campaign setting of the wilderness themselves. And this is about as shiny as I like to go with a map. It's you know, nice and readable, and you're not getting any light glaring off it, but you can kind of see with the light spots glaring off this thing, it is just gloss as all heck. However, that being said, it does not make the map unreadable or unusable, and it is very nice. It shows exactly the same as the original map, exactly the same terrain, exactly the same area. It's just clearer to see because it's in colour, and it's just, you know, nicely laid out. So what we have is the village of Tegel at the top here. Let me get to that point so you can see. So, I mean, this is nice as well. It folds up quite nicely. So let's see if that can focus in. Oh, it's very dark up there. There we go. No. Lighting here is awful as well. I probably need to get some spotlights to put at the top there, but never mind. I do have some spotlights floating around. But anyway, so the village of Tegel here, and then that goes on to the wilderness itself, all the way over to the bottom corner of the map, where you have the manor itself here. So the way that the wilderness map is set up: village at the top, manor at the bottom. Probably off the screen at the moment, manor at the bottom, and then a number of locations in between. Now, those locations weren't really fleshed out in the original versions, or the versions of it prior to this. So the second poster map that you get is of the manor itself, in colour, glorious colour, and it is same sort of printing, same kind of glossy material as the previous. Very, very detailed, and you can get in the digital side of it. You can get the files for this, which are really useful for using something like Roll20 or something like that. The problem I have with it. And let's go back. If you're using this at the table, as a map at the table, it is not as clear to follow through as the old style map. So the old style map, you've got it very clearly marked off in squares. It's very much your sort of oldie worldy dungeon map and so on. You have both a 30 feet and a 10-foot grid on it. Very easy to mark progress on and what have you. The new map, very pretty, very glorious, very good for an online tabletop type system, but at the actual real tabletop, it's a little bit too busy for that. So that's part of my criticism of the map, as I said I'd get to. There is, if I can show you this, the grid itself is marked, but it's marked out in dots. So hopefully you will be able to see. Oh, maybe not. Let's have a look. I'll put some pictures or something, so that you can actually see the dots of parts of the grid. But the little tiny little white dots that mark out the 10-foot grid, and they're all well and good on, you know, areas like this where you've got the greenery, a plain colour over quite a lot of area. But in parts of the manor, in areas like this that are quite large and so on, but in parts of the manor that are like this area, for example, there's no way you can see the dots. They just obscure, the grid gets obscured into the background. Now there's a little bit of alleviation to this in the book, which I'll come into, but by and large, The grid and the detail of this map are detractors from it. They look pretty. There's nothing wrong with the artwork, and it looks really, really good. And if you're using it through something like Roll20, fantastic resource. But on the tabletop, you're going to get your poor DM with myopia is just going to end up with headaches. Anyway, so that's the second poster map. It's a map of the manor as it was. Okay, so the manor itself, the book itself, is printed on some nice quality full colour paper. Starts off with some basic overview of the history of Tegel Manor as a publication, description of how the book is organised and laid out. Then it goes into a history of Judges Guild, Tegel Manor itself, and some notes from Bob Bledsaw II. Now, at this point, I will pause because some of you that may have landed on this as a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons video may now be, okay, so there's going to be three types of people, I imagine. There's going to be one set of people that have never heard of Judges Guild or Bob Bledsaw II or anything to do with it, or Tegel Manor or whatever. So what I'm about to say is going to be completely over their heads. There's going to be another group of people who have heard of Judges Guild, have heard of Tegel Manor, know what's going on currently with Judges Guild and particular Bob Bledsaw II, and don't really care. The third group of people are going to be know what's going on and do care. So let me just outline. I'm not going to go into the issues with Bob Bledsaw. Just suffice to say that he didn't say some intelligent things, or he said some rather unintelligent things. But the fact is that this adventure was a product of his dad's. It was a product of Judges Guild. He has inherited the company of Judges Guild. Judges Guild still exists as an entity. They still license products and bits and pieces out. Anyway, there is an issue floating around in that Bob Bledsaw II said some daft things, and so therefore a lot of the companies, including Frog God, that have got Judges Guild licenses have distanced themselves somewhat from them. To rest your mind about what's going on with this book, and if you go out and buy it from Frog God Games, are you going to start funding someone or giving funds to someone that whose outlooks in various subjects you find not to your tastes? And the answer is no. There is an agreement between Frog God Games. I've just discovered where all the ink is coming from on my desk. That needs to go in the bin. There is an agreement with Frog God Games such that the proceeds from the sale of this book go to support a Kickstarter that went rather awry and in other directions, shall we say. So if you do decide to go and invest in this book, then you are not putting monies into the hand of someone that you don't necessarily agree with their views. Right, so that's all I will say on that, and let's get on with the rest of looking at a book. Okay, so this is all information from Bob Bledsaw II, who does have some good things to say about it, interesting insights into it, regardless of his political views, and some notes additionally from Bill Webb. Right, so the original adventure, we've got the credits at the start. We've got Bill Webb, Tom Wilson, and original material by Gaber Lux, and I believe Gaber Lux was also involved in the 3rd edition version of this, the D20 version of this back in the day. But the original itself was written by Bob Bledsaw. Okay, so we get back into Tegel Village. So the book is split up into 3 major parts. I know there's like chapters and everything else, but it's the three major parts are Tegel Village, stuff going on within the wilderness area and within the vicinity of Tegel Village, and then the manor itself. So within the table of contents, we've got Tegel Village, the lands around Tegel Village, and then when we get to Rampaging Rooms, that's when we're starting to deal with the manor, Tegel Manor itself. So there is an additional set of storylines and bits and pieces that the characters can get involved in as side treks and what have you. So yeah, Tegel Village, bits and pieces about that, some information about everything else is going on there. Then we get into the wilderness areas, so there's your typical fare of random encounters, smaller version of the poster map, and then some bits and pieces from going around. Right, this Sanctum of Madness is a separate adventure that takes place in around it. Not surprisingly, with a name like Frog God Games, it is centered around Sarthogua, or Sarthogus, shall we call it in this way, but obviously based on Sarthogua, which is Clark Ashton Smith addition to the Cthulhu pantheon of things. But this is kind of dealing with that. There's a whole storyline that the characters can get involved in. It's for about level 3 characters, and it gives them something to get involved in to get their levels up, so that they can start having a go at the manor with a little bit of experience behind them. So that takes there's a fair bit of it. So there you go. So that is a page 16 to page 50. So that is about a 34-page adventure in the midst of it all, and it's a separate thing. It's not really associated with the manor itself. It just happens to be in the same area as the manor, and is a useful side quest for the characters to get involved in. Then we get into the manor itself, and the manor takes up there we go. The manor takes up a good chunk of the book. All right. So I won't, for general spoilers, I won't go into it in too detail. But what I was saying about the map and referring it back and making it a little bit more, or alleviate the problems of the poster map being very detailed in what's going on. This is where that alleviation comes from. So these little maps, and it goes and describes an area of the manor and provides a section map of that area that it's describing, and there's another one there, another one there, and so on, another one there. So these are really useful because it means that instead of having to unfold and peer and try and work out where the heck you are on the poster map, you've got a smaller version and you know exactly what you're dealing with. So all of the descriptions for the rooms for the smaller section map that's in the book are all within a few pages of that book, part of the map, right? So the fact that the poster map is very detailed and very chaotic and very difficult to directly see things, that is somewhat alleviated by having these smaller version or smaller sections in scattered throughout the book, right? So the manor itself, outbuildings, dungeons of, so on, and then we come to portraits. The Rump family tree, so a bit of the backstory to the manor itself comes through its current owner. Is one Sir Runic Rump, a paladin that's hard on his luck, partially because the manor is haunted by Runic Rump, haunted by a lot of his family members that haven't quite gone away yet. So a number of his family members are undead or other horrific types of being. So one of the possible ways to get the characters involved is Runic Rump turning up to them within Tegel Village getting in touch with them in some way and inviting them to go and help him or clear out for him the haunted mansion that is his birthright. So the portraits of all the various members of the family tree, and part of the Kickstarter was people could get their own portraits in here as part of the Rump family. So if you paid a certain tier level as part of the Kickstarter, then that's one of the perks that you got, was getting involved in that. Then a bunch of monsters, as is common with any of this, and monster statistic blocks for those. The statues is that's something that came over from the original adventure. The fact that some of the statues can have random powers and various attributes. So this gives you a random statue generation process. There are a few statues scattered around the adventure, around the manor. Stuff on traps, so to randomly generate traps. A bit about eldritch experiments, about laboratory areas and so on. There are certain areas of the manor that are suitably laboratory-like. Some new magical items, some new spells, and then the legal appendix. Okay, so that's an overview of the book itself, and I think it is... Now, I think, to me, it is better laid out, far better laid out than the Goodman Games Original Adventures Reincarnated books. I don't necessarily think it's as well written and thought out as those books. So they're probably flip-flopping between the two. So I'd say that the Goodman Games ones are poorly laid out but pretty well written. This 5th edition conversion of an older 1st edition, original edition, whatever, classic adventure is well laid out but not as well written, which is not to say that it's poorly written. Make that clear. It is still reasonably well written and very usable. So that's basically an overview of the book itself and the poster maps and everything else connected with the book. Okay, so what is Tegel Manor? Let's go for that. Tegel Manor is a haunted mansion adventure that manages to combine that sort of horror element with a funhouse dungeon, a zoo dungeon, and a dungeon crawl slog. It's more interesting than a lot of dungeon crawls. There is a point to some of the rooms. They does keep players on their toes, does make them think. They do have a purpose. If the purpose is to go and clear the manor for the Rump family's continued, or the living members of the Rump family's continued use of the place, then there is a purpose to go in and try and clear and solve the mysteries of each particular area. Some parts of it are more dangerous than others. There are several monsters in there that control various chunks of the manor that low-level parties would find very difficult to deal with. Some of the traps in there are pretty nefarious. It's not quite Tomb of Horrors level of trap nefariousness, but it's not far below that. It is, if you playing the manor side of it, it is an old school feel. It is an old school get into the dungeon and sort the dungeon out. If you play the horror overtone to it as well, then you can certainly build. There's enough material within there, and the monsters are the opponents, whatever you want to call them, are selected well to be able to go and put that horror overtone to it. Great Halloween adventure or something like that. So that's basically it. The Tegel Manor itself is a very large funhouse zoo of a haunted mansion. Who would it suit? It would suit people that want that old school dungeon crawl feel. I think people that enjoy mysteries of haunted mansions would find get a lot of enjoyment out of this. It may work within the concept of a Ravenloft domain or something like that. It certainly would work within the framework of the Wilderlands, which is the campaign setting that it was originally lifted from or placed in. And we will get to describing the Wilderlands when we come and start putting together the series on various campaign settings and game menus. One of the most important things I think about this game is it's ideal for younger people to get them into playing the game, the mechanics of the game, without necessarily having a straight as an arrow storyline to play them through. So I think having observed the way that that 12, 13, 14-year-olds play Dungeons and Dragons, I think it would suit that sort of play style that they tend to come up with. Not those groups that are necessarily more fond of the storytelling aspect of things, but certainly those ones that are more fun of the let's go and kick the door down or burn this village or whatever, because there's a lot of kind of scope for that sort of play. You can rampage your way through it and just destroy all the undead and have fun with it that way. But the horror story stuff can be played up or played down as much as you like. So you can make it quite gruesome if you are playing with more mature people, with adults, or you can make it more of a fun horror, Halloween type style if you're playing with younger people. So I think it's not a bad book. It's not a bad adventure to pick up as almost as a starter adventure. It's probably not it's not hand-holdy, so it's not suitable for a starter DM necessarily. But if you are getting your kids into playing Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, and you're a seasoned dungeon master, then I think give it a go. And that applies if you're getting them into first edition, then try the original. If you're getting them into 5th edition, then try this. If you're more into the classic sets of rules, then maybe the Swords and Wizardry version of this will be more to your taste. So yeah, I can recommend it for all sorts of reasons. All of the above. It's a nice adventure to have on the shelf, to be dragged out, probably at Halloween, to have some fun with. And that is Tegel Manor from Frog God Games. This version is the 5th edition conversion of it, and there is Swords and Wizardry conversion and some Pathfinder notes too. That's it for this impromptu, semi-impromptu review of things, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.